Hello.
Hi. Welcome everyone to this lovely, it's a Sunday afternoon for us here in Vancouver. And I know that we have uh, other people joining in from around the world. So thank you and welcome. We think it's 2 o'clock right now. I might give us a minute to just kind of settle down and have everyone who's in the waiting room come in. Uh, Welcome to our uh, to the TomoeArts Salon Series this year, and we to start off, I'd like to acknowledge that TomoeArts as a company is located and works out of is situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And our lovely guest today comes from Victoria, and that is a part of the traditional territories of the Coen peoples. And now I would love to introduce you to our guest, Hitomi Harama-san, and just so everyone knows, this our talk today is being recorded. So there are certain registrants who are unable to come. So this is recorded and you will be able to view this for a short period of time on the TomoeArts YouTube channel when we are finished and when that goes up. So let's actually have Hitomi-san, please say hello so we have you on the screen. There we go.
Hello. And thank you for the people who registered and also joining today. That I know Sunday is a precious time and then nice day. People like to go out, and then thank you for spending your time joining this event. I really appreciate it. And so
let's brief introduction.
Sure.
So Hitomi-san is a kimono and cultural specialist based in Victoria, BC. And she's given many talks in the past about kimono culture and helped curate exhibits at local museums and universities. And we are so lucky to have such a wonderful resource in Vancouver, in around BC. And we get to have a lovely casual chat with her today. And one of the things that I would love to know more, Hitomi-san, is that in all your biographies, you mentioned that you grew up in a traditional family. I'd love to hear more what that meant to you and how that shaped your knowledge of kimono.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that my traditional background is the reason that is happening is because my maternal family is having a temple, Buddhist temple, and then they had a practice of all those Japanese traditions type of stuff all the time. And then also my mother wearing kimono every day as a daily clothes, which was not very common at the time that I grew up. It was for Japanese, kimono was a daily wear for all the time, but by the time I grew up with, it was not something that all the other friends' mom are wearing. So that is always bringing me little different type of a style of upbringing. But of course, I was wearing regular Western clothes when I go to school and stuff like that. But I was surrounded by the traditional style, and then particularly my grandparents had carried almost like an Edo period style lifestyle. So that influenced me a lot. And then seeing my mother wearing kimono as an everyday clothes, that also made me to have more understanding plus closeness to kimono. And then so that is something that I have as a background. And
That's
then
amazing.
yeah, and then my mother was always wearing kimono, for example. So then, so occasionally she wore regular Western clothes when she goes plays golf and so. And then if somebody sees my mother wearing regular Western clothes, all those people usually, oh, so 珍しい. It's so unusual that you're wearing something not kimono. That's how my kimono. My mother had an image of wearing kimono all the time. So that was kind of unusual for the time that I was growing up. So
Wow, that's amazing. You don't happen to have any photos at that time, do you, of like your
I
childhood?
looked for it, but I unfortunately most of the photos are with my mother and back home, and I'm over here. And then by then we didn't have digital camera, so that's why I didn't really have a chance to go through. And I'm sorry that I can't show good photo here, but
That's all right.
yeah,
It's just always interesting to see real life people. You see some photos in books or museums. I was like, oh,
right.
lovely. But that's
Right.
okay. You mentioned like, can you tell us more about, I guess, coming to Canada then?
Mhm.
What was it like for you for that transition?
I mean, I was growing up in not like I knew already about North American culture and everything. But aside of the clothing, that I wasn't living in the old-fashioned style. I was brought up in a modern style, so I'm kind of like having both the idea, old tradition, and also modern Japanese culture, pop culture. And then because I was influenced by the new modern culture so much, I decided to immigrate, even coming to North America. So in a way, I was could be avant-garde from the traditional family style, but so it's kind of interesting mixture. I have both. So I am using both idea, trendy Japanese style, and then also traditional Japanese style. And then the differences are so much. And then knowing also kimono culture is almost dying out in Japan, that made me to feel like I want to do something to preserve this beautiful culture. And then starting to do things like curating kimono exhibit or doing things like this activities, talking or making a YouTube and talk about kimono and Japanese culture. It's just because I feel that's losing, like we are getting, less and less people know about kimono or traditional Japanese culture, which is sad. So I like to at least preserve the essence of it. And that's why I'm doing this type of activities.
That's great. Thank you so much. Tell us a little, like, I know that you do a lot of talks on kimono history. I think you've prepared some information for us. Please tell us more about kind of the basics that we should know and maybe some.
Thank you, Evelyn-san. That's excellent. So that gives me a chance to talk about some history of kimono, if that's okay. And the kimono, many people know perhaps from the history, like it has a history of more than 1,200 years, which is in Japanese history, it's called the Heian period. And then amazingly, Japanese people still have that. If you can show me the, Ryan can show me the A1 photo, the Japanese empress and emperor, when they do marriage ceremony or special formal ceremony, they still wear this type of Heian style clothing. The princess, in this case, empress, is wearing this Juni Hitoe. It's called 12 layers of clothing, which is not exactly really 12 layers, but there's a juni, it's like a meaning, like a multiple. So many layers of a kimono garment is laid out, and then that was the formal attire and then dress up style for upper class people back then in Heian period. And then even now, emperor and empress has this type of attire when they have formal ceremony. And so the kimono that we wear nowadays is actually an undergarment of all these style. And the funny thing is the fashions always seems to be the undergarment become like a outside clothes. Like I know, like in the 80s, already 80s or early 90s, like a Britney Spears came in a skimpy clothes. Like and then all those clothing became more like a trend for the high school girls. And then people wearing almost like an undergarment type of things going outside. For the older generation, it looks like oh, they are really skimpy and then they're not really wearing real clothes. And that's how it seems to be becoming. But even in a traditional style, undergarment is now the attire that like I'm wearing today. So if you can just take off this photo, and then yeah, all these the kimono that I'm wearing, for example, this is used to be inner clothing, not to wear outside for the higher class people, for example. So that knowing the history, it's kind of interesting how
I
the
think that
kimono
that
is.
is really funny that
Mhm.
I guess even in Western clothing, yeah, a lot of things that people used to wear, like clothing, if you think about like all the lacy dresses, it's like, oh, that
Exactly.
used to be undergarments and now everyone's wearing it as a dress. I guess
Yeah,
that's very similar to what's happened with
yeah.
kimono then.
It seems like seeing that the history, it's always like that way. So revealing from inside to outside, like a real fashion. So it's kind of funny, but that's been the thing that I noticed through kimono.
Wow,
Yeah, and
that's
yeah,
great. So
yeah. Mm.
thank you for showing us the very super traditional, the most formal outfit. Like, what about, do you what would you wear if, let's say, because I know kimono, many of us here who are in this talk just
Mm.
really love kimono and want to wear it and are interested in, but we don't want to offend anyone, of course.
Mhm.
So like, what would you say would be a good thing to wear, say, like the difference between going out to a fancy dinner and a theater show, like kimono that you wear to that, versus
Mhm.
going to your friend's house to enjoy tea or going shopping?
Mhm.
Is what
A
are the kind of
great
differences?
question. Thank you for that great question. Like I know kimono is not just the same clothing. Like just like Western clothes, we have formal clothes to casual clothes, and then there's a quite big layers in kimono world. Just like Japanese language, which has honorifics and casual language, and then all sorts. Kimono has many layers, and which comes from actually the go back to the history again. Comes from the tradition of Japanese kimono. Like older days, the higher class people could wear silk kimono, and then of course wealthy higher class people have more varieties of kimono. So they can even change kimono every day if they want, like a celebrity life. We think about celebrity life nowadays. When they go appear on TV, they may change the out garment every single shot. They don't repeat the same thing, never. So that type of things happened in the old style in Japanese culture as well. Higher class people, when they go out to the ceremony, they'll be in a public eye. So they don't want to wear the same kimono again, if it's a princess, for example. So they can change the kimono depend on the season, depending on the day, depending on the occasion. So there is a specific style of coordination. So if it's a sakura cherry blossom season, of course they would wear cherry blossom season type of things. And then if it's in a fall time, that you would pick on, usually they pick the garment material design motifs from the nature. So if it's a fall time that I picked today, for example, like a chrysanthemum. So it's a coordinate your attire to the season so that would feel more appropriate. That's how the Japanese culture is big on the seasonal changes, as you know. So, and then also there's a beautiful 4 season differences in Japanese, most of the Japanese land. So depending on the season, we changed attire and then trying to intake the motif from the nature And particularly for the flower, perhaps that's usually the best motif for the kimono. So that's usually coming into this type of style.
Now,
And
is that something that came from like historically too, like in Edo and Meiji period? Is that all? Would they
I
also
think
do that?
historically going way more back to those, like even Muromachi Jidai is that's the time like a big Japanese shogun is like a Hideyoshi, for example. When they having a party, they always wanted the women to dress nicely. And then so depending on the theme of the gathering, they usually bring up the topic. Like today is a cherry blossom tea ceremony type of thing. So then everyone's trying to dress up to coordinate for that special event. So from that type of things, I think gradually kimono code or kimono culture has been established. And then that became more intensely flourished during Edo period when the commoners started to have more power, economical power. So not just a hierarchy of class system, but when you are wealthier, particularly merchant, they could choose whatever they like to wear. So all those things started to produce more fashion. And then so going back a little more to your formality code thingy, during the Edo period, there's a strict class systems in place. And then so depending where you belong to, the social classes, the kimono attire and the hairdo, even makeup were designated. So if you see certain style of kimono attire, you can tell, oh, she belongs to this kind of class. So that code still carried into kimono culture. So the formal kimono, we call so-called formal kimono, usually used to be worn by the higher class, upper class people. And then kimono, we nowadays recognize as a casual kimono, was something that the middle class or working class people wearing. So for example, tsumugi kimono is a woven kimono like this, usually for more casual clothing. It's because those are the clothing that was allowed for commoners in Edo period. So that's why it's still coded as a casual kimono. And then there's a funny, interesting culture is among tsumugi kimono, there's also many different type of variety. And then some of them are quite expensive these days. It's more expensive sometimes than the casual clothes. I mean, that's already dress up kimono to woven for Yuki Tsumugi, for example, it's almost dying out because there's not enough successor. They do make everything from hand, which I described in my YouTube. I think it's YouTube number 6 or so. But this is like one to make one of those balls. It takes a half year at least, or even year. So all those time that to be taken to produce one type of garment that has to be as pricey as somebody's 1 year living expense, right? So that became very expensive these days, but it's still coded as a casual attire. It's because it used to be more like a tsumugi kimono was a working class kimono. So there's a strange intricate kimono rules there. So that made the younger generation puzzled, and then they just stay away from, okay, that's way too much. I don't know what to do with it. So they don't want to follow, or they don't want to carry on those anymore, or just don't know anymore. And so that's one of the reasons maybe that I'm assuming kimono culture is dying out. But there is interesting kimono histories laid out into all those kimono differences in clothing and everything. So I like to at least take out those essence as a history, part of the history, because not seems to be very well carried out these days anymore. So.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really interesting that the kimono that you're wearing is looks very beautiful, but yes, compared to the one in your background, that one looks plainer, but really it takes almost more time to weave that fabric.
Sometimes this one is not that way, but I'm just one example, there's a totally different variety of tsumugi textile as well. Tsumugi is the term used for kimono world as a woven kimono. Woven kimono, these are also woven as a textile, but all these patterns are dyed patterns. So somemono in Japanese, somemono usually goes to a little more like a upper formal type of clothing. And then tsumugi is woven clothes, which is the patterns made by woven style. So woven pattern kimono is usually called tsumugi kimono. And then that's more like a working clothes. And then in the older days, the material was also separated between the class system. So higher people can wear silk, but the lower class people can only wear like a linen, or these days linens are expensive, but linen or cotton, something like that. And so so all those are still affecting Japanese kimono culture, which like many people perhaps don't even know how it came through the history, but it's interesting if you really find out why it's like this. And the kimono that I wear today is not super formal, but somewhere upper formal, perhaps, because if I'm standing and then going into a little different type of location, I might have worn different type of clothing, but because it's just through the camera, I like to keep a higher upper attire class, but also doesn't need to be super gorgeous because I'm sitting down and it's a different situation. And but I like to also show my respect to the this occasion and the viewer. So I did coordinate my kimono in a certain formal style today. So I didn't come in a tsumugi kimono, for example.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
thank you very much. It's
Color coordination too. I also wanted to make it more like a festive because it's a special event. So I selected a little more like a gold color type of obi, and then higher. This is more formal style of coordination, like a whiter or ivory type of color. And then so all these details that when you coordinate, you think about not just yourself, not just your own fashion, but for where you're going, where you're attending. So the kimono coordination is not just the color and the comfiness or whatever you want to wear. It's all enfold everything that you attend to, something like that. So.
Wow. So lighter colors are actually are considered more formal. Is that?
No, it's the lighter color I mentioned was obishime obiage. Those coordination for the formal occasion, we usually coordinate ivory or whiter color. So as kimono can coordinate different type of obi. For example, we can wear different sash belt obi so that the kimono coordination can tone down a bit, depends, and or tone up a little bit, depends how you coordinate. So it's not just this kimono itself, but it also takes up all these coordination together, then makes up the whole look of kimono.
So let's, for example, if you want, is it possible for that kimono to be toned down to a slightly less formal? Because you said because of the cream and the ivory, it's now more formal.
Yes.
How would you change it to make it less formal looking?
Yeah, less formal, a little more like a casual look. For example, I could wear like a little more greenish color, whatever. And then also I can change this obi entirely to something like a maybe black or whatever, something different type of kimono, and then coordination. Then also you can tone down or tone up or adjust your kimono style. So that's one of the beauty and the world of kimono many people become so fascinated about. It's not just one dress. Like if it's a Western dress, you cannot tailor too much when you wear. Maybe the jewelry, that makes that the formalness different for the Western clothing. So that's why jewelry is more important for Western culture. In the older days, kimono culture, we didn't have any jewelry. But this is kind of like a jewelry. All these coordination, and kimono garment is kind of like a work of art. So you're wearing artistic pieces, and then you can coordinate in a different way. So doesn't require too much jewelry to dress up. But now I know that from the towards the end of Edo period, Japanese culture also started to receive some influence from Western culture. So there are obishime, which has a jewelry as well. So that is also putting a little more formality up, which is also introduced in my YouTube channel. In YouTube, I can show more about kimono coordination closer. So I do go into that type of detail, how to coordinate and stuff like that. But if you go to the regular kimono exhibit, for example, you see the whole kimono hang just like this, and then there's no coordination between kimono and obi. It's partly because you can't show that way for many lengths of time. And then so you just hang a kimono, and then kimono by itself is beautiful, but the real beauty of kimono is when you actually coordinate it with obi and other small details. But it's very difficult to show that in a regular exhibit that I've learned and experienced through my own exhibit. Whenever I did, like I wished if I could show kimono with all those coordination, but if you do that for like a 3 month or 6 month putting in a exhibit area, that is not good for the kimono garment. So we just hang like a straight way, but you can only show kimono, but not the coordination. So it's like you're showing only the glimpse of kimono culture, but not entirely. So there's a limit in those type of physical exhibit. So then I started to think of, is there any other way, better way? I thought of writing a book, but the book is also required so many photos to really show the kimono world. And then YouTube was actually economical. Like making a book, you have to print out a really nice picture. So when I talked about it with a publisher, that became very expensive. So we also thought it's almost impossible to bring that kimono world into the book, but through the media, that is much easier. So now if I have time, I like to do a little more YouTube making to preserve or just to make a record of how kimono should be coordinated or what kind of variety you can do with kimono. But yeah, so.
Oh, that's great. There's actually a question coming about, someone wanted to know more about obidome, or the decorative, I guess the jewels or this little pins that you would put on obi. Do you cover that in your YouTube channel
Yes,
yet?
one time I showed in 1 or 2, but I didn't make anything just with the obidome. And then if there's somebody who questioned to you through this, well, there's somebody. I think there's one lady who was mentioning that question to my YouTube as well, and I haven't had a chance to do that. But then, yes, there are quite a few different type of style as well, and then. I think the lady who contacted me through my YouTube, she was keen knowing about the geiko, maiko, geisha style of obidome, obishime. And those are not used by the commoners or regular ladies, but there are quite a few different type of style. Yes, but
I've heard that those can be very expensive too.
yes, yeah, because it's going into the jewelry, and I'm staying away from too much going into the obidome, obishime. It's because it's more like a jewelry culture, not exactly traditional Japanese culture. So, in the older Japanese kimono history, jewelry wasn't included. So I'm not going into that too much because I think it's a little different territory for me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm actually interested to going back to the fabric that you have hanging behind you, the tsumugi, that's more for working class. Could you, you mentioned that you can, if you coordinate that with an appropriate obi, could you turn that into make that into a slightly more higher class view? Like, I don't know, is that something that you can do, or is that type of
You can
kimono?
go like a tsumugi kimono for coordination, like a appropriate style of tsumugi kimono to go out is going to the lecture. If you give a lecture, if your professor give a lecture, tsumugi kimono would be very fine to show up in the academic type of places, just because it's not so gaudy, not so flashy. My kimono could be too much to go to the lecture. I mean, if you're kimono specialist and talking about kimono, that's fine. But if you're, say, anthropologist and then trying to give you some lecture about anthropology, then tsumugi kimono would be much more appropriate, I think. Or going to the theater, going to the museum. So that kind of occasion, tsumugi kimono, upper class tsumugi kimono would be just fine. Depends on the tsumugi. There's also layers of tsumugi kimono. I can't show the picture and so, but unfortunately, but things like this would be fine. And then kimono obi coordination makes those upper or little lower or that type of coordination slightly tuned differently. So that depends on the obi. If you use a shioze obi, it's a little more higher class. But if you're wearing casual hanhaba obi with the woven style, then that could be toned down more like a daily casual wear. Let's go back to the tsumugi part, and then not just with the tsumugi kimono. Can I also mention a little more about kimono structure, which is also fascinating for also the differences across the Western clothes. The thing that I usually mention whenever I bring up kimono is very ecological. And I wish that this culture could have been staying a little longer, but unfortunately nowadays Western clothes, that with regular clothes for Japanese people these days, and then we are more accustomed to that. But kimono, the structure is made over 1200 years. So I'm sure there's lots of nice tuning in happened. And when you create kimono, we don't waste any part of the garment. If you're aware or if you know how to make a Western clothes, I think there's like a curves or cuts and darts, and then you have to cut up panels of textile. And then when you make one clothes, if you take off all those threads and then make into just like a pieces, you cannot recreate another cloth so easily unless the size is really small or just use a piece of that. Kimono garment is made with like about 4.5 meter long strip of garment. And then this is usually how we show in a kimono store the bolts of garment, and then we select the material. Going back to the ecological garment of kimono, that the one best benefit feature of kimono that I like to emphasize is kimono garment never waste any part of the garment. And then the one behind me, this was actually once made into kimono fabric, but it's taken off all the thread and then back to the regular panels to wash. As you know, you don't wash kimono as in a laundry machine, stuff like that. To clean, you have to take off all these thread off and then wash it and then make it into the regular panel and then re-sew again. So it's quite complicated. I see everything is full. Can you hear me? Evelyn?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, keep talking. You're still good.
Okay, I got a little worried. And then, so I don't know if you can see some of these threads here. It's maybe not so easy, but this area, and this area, it's once cut, and then when you wash, you reconnected all these to put in back to the panel. And the area cut into half is the area, if it's in my kimono, for the front part. If you can see half panel, and that's like a whole panel. So there is a segment that when you cut, it's only cut into this half panel, but we can, and also this color area is use this half panel area as well. And if it's a particular type of design, then it's not easy to rotate, but all these panels, if it's a tsunugi kimono, since everywhere is the same type of style, you can actually rotate. And in the older days, like if you're not celebrity, you perhaps wear 1 or 2 kimono throughout the year. And then you don't change, you don't have any seasonal differences or whatever. But in the winter time, we use a inner layer. So it makes it a little more warmer. So in kimono, we have hitoe and awase kimono. Hitoe kimono is just like a single layer, so which is a little more breezier and then cooler. And then awase kimono is for a little more cooler area time, like a fall or so. In the winter time, we even had a padded kimono in the older days. Nowadays, we don't use that much anymore, but padded kimono is like those the stuffed jacket, for example. And then so it makes it a little more padded and warmer. So it's good for the winter time. So depending on the season, people resew kimono every time to put the inner lining or even putting a inside padding, so that keeps it warmer. So remake and reuse. And then another very good part of kimono making is because we don't waste any area or we don't make any curve, we can rotate the location. So just like a pants or sweater, sometimes these corner area, for example, if it's kimono, these knee area get worn out much quicker. So you can rotate the fabric in some way so you don't have any hole. So you can make that kimono durability longer by doing that type of little tiny adjustment. So all these, so many things that a kimono by itself, it looks kind of easy, not easy to wear, but of course it's comparing to the those gym clothes, and so it's not as comfy and easy. But when you think about 1800 in the Western clothing, compared to those, kimono garment is much more comfy and also easier to wear. And I like to show Lions. Can we show the picture, or I guess not yet?
I don't think it'll be safe right now, unfortunately,
Right.
just because of what's happened.
Okay. And then, so that's okay. But then in the another, so all these things like recreate is happening or the applicable for any type of kimono. So any kimono garment has the same style of making, men or women, child or whoever. So there's only one style. I'll show you this one. So from this type of garment material, we can make this sleeve area little shorter, but it's all square, as you can see. And then everything is like a one strip of garment. So the kimono and the Western clothes differences, Western clothes are already made into the body shape, like a curve. And so the kimono is straight. So when you wear, you have to wrap up and then adjust by using himo belt. And then so that's where kimono kitsuke style comes from. But so whatever your body shape or body size is, if you can tailor, adjust when you wear, then you don't need to worry too much of gaining weight or losing weight. So you can still fit into the same style. For example, like my mother, when she was pregnant, she could wear same kimono all through her pregnancy. And then you don't need to buy maternity clothes, for example.
That's a really interesting thing that you just brought up. Where would you, if you were pregnant, how would you tie the obi? Like, is that not uncomfortable?
Japanese culture, we have also another garment. It's called, not garment, custom. When you know you are pregnant, like a 3 month or so, by 3 months, your pregnancy becomes a little more secure. So you have your one small celebration ceremony. And at that time, you wear special obi called haraobi. And then that special sarashi is a Japanese term, but kind of like a gauze type of thin cotton material, which you start to wrap up your tummy, abdominal area to support you become, your body start to change your shape, and then your belly area is become more protrude. And then that in Western clothes, I think there's like a supporter for the pregnant lady, not to have a stretch mark and so. And in Japanese culture, we had those type of obi, undergarment obi, to support your belly area first. And then these obi, actually, you can adjust in a loose way or tight way, whatever you want to. So this is adjustable again. So even if you're pregnant or very skinny, you can wrap up in a way you feel most comfortable. So you don't need to really change that. Even if you're pregnant, you can still wear same kimono and obi. And then, by the way, these type of obi, wide obi, became more fashion in Edo period, which I was preparing the photo that I wanted to share, which I can't today. But in the older days, when you wear kimono, even for the princess and so, you just wore narrow style of strip of garment. You don't need to have this much width to have kimono properly. Kimono garment is easy. You can just tie up with like a small strip of line. And that's how it was in the older days. But to add up more fashion and more decorative elements, it became much wider, particularly during Edo period. And then I was also going to show the fashion differences in Tokyo and Kyoto. Kyoto was nowadays known in Japan as a tourist mecca, as so many nice old traditional buildings and so. But Kyoto was the old capital of Japan, and where the higher upper class people lived. And then they had much more elegant style, but they didn't wear these type of wide obi back then. These are made from Edo period. You know, the Harajuku girl create a pop and fashion. Same thing happened at that time too. All these pop culture came from Edo. And then so Edo people started to create many different interesting kimono fashion, which I can't share the photo today anymore, but I will do someday for my video. So, but there this type of long strip of obi belt, and then plus the long sleeve furisode style, that's also started from Edo period. So all these fashion that we kind of know a little bit is created in some point of Japanese history.
Wow, thank you. That's I'm so sorry. I just want to apologize that we unfortunately cannot show the photos just because we're in a little technical difficulties.
I will make it into YouTube someday. So
that's great. This is actually a perfect time for us, for you to let us know about more about what you do. Like, tell us about your YouTube channel, and like, do you have any exhibits coming up, or do you have any talks that you're going to be doing anytime soon?
I am going to start some classes in the in the Victoria. That's also now under just the talking, so I don't want to talk about it too much yet. And then maybe the exhibit, I did exhibit in 2014 and 17, and then another one was just going to happen 2020, but then that didn't really be shown because of the COVID. And then last 3 years, this is the third year, but it has been very quiet and I couldn't do much. And then during that period, I started the YouTube channel, which I wanted to do as a replacement of doing some physical exhibit and so. But after I started to make a YouTube channel, I realized that it's actually much better medium to show what the kimono world is like. Because if it's an exhibit at the gallery or museum, that you can only show the panel of kimono, I cannot really go into this type of coordination part type of matter go into the deeper of kimono world was almost impossible to do that in the physical exhibit. But with the YouTube channel, I can go close up and show the pattern. I can talk about the meaning of pattern, which I did for some of my YouTube video. Hope you can look at that again, but I can go into the details more in the YouTube making. So I hope I can continue doing that, but it's just that technically my computer is getting old. So I had a little difficulty to create too many videos. It's taking up so much space. Then I use external, but external usually often failed. So I lost some of the data, recreate, and it got a little too much for me to deal with and then work on the side. And so if I had high-end modern computer, that could have been easily able to manage that, but I just didn't have that yet. So yeah,
well,
but
working on it.
yes. Yeah,
Well,
if I can do crowdfunding or something, like a nice computer set, then I can be much easier. But I like to do that. I hope to continue that from even now too, to do more about these type of things that I couldn't do today, for example.
yeah. Thank you so much. We do have the link to your YouTube channel in the chat right now, so people can check that out. I think we are getting close to 3 o'clock, so we have a few minutes for some questions. If anyone wants to type the question into the chat room, and then I will relay that to Hitomi-san. And I think one of the questions that we had earlier was that there's a lot of talk about climate change, and you had mentioned that there's a lot, you can reuse kimono fabric a lot and change it up for the season by either adding in a lining or adding in padding. And I know that there are a lot of rules with what you wear. Like at certain times of the year, you would wear the lined one in the winter. Do you see that with the weather, with how weather changes, if those rules are still going to be very, like, if hard set wear, if the summer is much longer now, can you still wear perhaps an unlined kimono further into the fall? Or if it's
like I know kimono has those bounding rules for the certain season type of kimono and blah blah blah. Yeah, people who has taken tea ceremony class might have experienced, like for this day you have to wear awase kimono and that kind of stuff. And then yes, that is predominantly very strict, but I think we have to be loosened. And then some of those rules are actually not really traditional neither, because Japanese the schedule, that the calendar has been completely edited after the World War II. I didn't have a chance to talk about that today, but I think the Japanese kimono culture closely related to the older Japanese calendar. And then so all these kimono change rules usually belong to that old calendar. But now it's kind of strangely converted into the modern calendar, which sometimes doesn't work. So even when it's really hot, you have to still wear awase kimono. If you follow little more nature schedule, the kimono culture fits into beautifully, because that's how it was in the older days. But because of all these alternative modulation or transition that happened over the history, that modern life, it seems to be kimono is a bit off. But if you really look at if I had a chance to talk about a little longer, I can really go into and then solve that mystery. But it's really ecological clothing, and then we don't even waste a piece. Kimono is used from these type of upper going out clothes to the rug, and then could be even the fertilizing the plants at the end. So that has a long history, and then nothing is wasted. It was really by organic lifestyle related type of clothing.
That actually leads us perfectly into another question that we have here. Like you had mentioned that when you wash a kimono, you would take it apart and then you sew it, and then you can shift the fabric so that the wear and tear is in a different spot. How many times can a bolt of fabric be sewn into kimono, taken apart, re-sewn into kimono? Like how many times, how can that happen?
Yeah, it depends on the type of kimono. Like people, like these type of tsumugi kimono can be quite durable, and then you can do many type of odo. Then they can even rotate not just this position, but front and back. You can use the reverse side as well, because all these back side is about the same. And then the pattern's a little different, but both looks beautiful because it's woven nicely. So you can actually go reverse. If there's some stain on the front, you can just reverse the kimono and you can look like a brand new. But for the kimono, for the upper class type of kimono, that's not the case because it's used more like a consumption type of, they didn't care to make it longevity because they can take changes all the time. And then they usually go into the second-hand store. So, and then people who's not very wealthy or semi-wealthy but cannot afford clothes like a princess wore, then you can get from that type of place. And in Edo period, I'm sorry, I'm talking really quickly because I have a time limit, but in Edo period, there's also second-hand store kimono as well. So they are people dealt these upper class people's once worn kimono, still nice condition, much nicer than the commoner's kimono, was sold as a second-hand kimono. So so there is a certain way of recycling, but for the wash and the remake, upper class kimono is not as durable as this tsumugi kimono. This is far more durable, and then you can use almost throughout your life if you do take care of it nicely.
Wow, that's a very long life for
But by the end, I'm sure it's going to be much raggy, but it's softer. And it's another feature of those nicely woven tsumugi kimono. They actually appreciate the little older, well-used one because then fabric become much softer. And then so it become warmer as well, so fluffier. So there's many other tuning and tailoring about the kimono world, but it's too much detail for just a short time of the period like today. But yes, you can use as a lifetime or sometimes few more generations if you do nicely rotating.
That's amazing. Though you've actually, those are some really good tips now that Japan is again open for tourists to come in. Those are some things that people can keep in mind if they go and buy secondhand kimono, if they go.
Yeah, if you buy the real traditional one, it is nice, but don't go by the modern style. It's completely different. That's another thing that I didn't go into, but all these kimono, when you make kimono, you select the fabric and then make it into your style. So it's kind of like an haute couture style of creation of clothing. For the kimono people in a traditional manner, if it's already made as a kimono shape, it's samely dealt as a second-hand kimono. In the real kimono world, you start selecting from the fabric, not from the made kimono. So that's another thing, like traditional style. If you go buy Chanel clothes, you don't buy something hung up, right? You select the fabric first and then have it made for you. So that's the type of style that traditional kimono was selected and made, if it's like a higher upper class kimono.
So it's very much like haute couture. It's made for you.
Exactly. So that so kimono, some people say it's expensive, but not as expensive as Chanel clothes or same as Chanel clothes. Or some of those kimono fabric is more valuable, so it could be more expensive, but it's not as expensive or almost about the same level as Chanel or Dior. When you go to haute couture, that's how much you spend, at least $20,000 or $30,000 to make one clothes in Chanel. So that happens to kimono as well.
Wow. Thank you so much. And we are, with the disruption, unfortunate disruption, we are now just over 3 o'clock, which was what we had planned for. And I want to thank everyone who has stuck around. Thank you so much for coming. If there are any other questions you would like to ask Hitomi-san right now, I think we probably can extend for another 5 or 6 minutes if there are any other questions. But so if anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat room. But if like many people, your Sunday afternoon is precious. We are officially at an end right now. So you can feel free to enjoy what's left of the sunlight, or you can stick around if you've got a question you'd like to ask Hitomi-san while we still have her for a few minutes. Yeah, so I'll just monitor the chat.
For joining, and it was so unfortunate that the screen was hacked, and then I'm still a little distracted by that as well, and I'm sorry that people who had to leave. Yeah, anyway, nice to see you still. And thank you for this occasion, TomoeArts. And then thank you, Evelyn, for leading me nicely. And then thank you, Colleen, that I can't see you anymore on this screen. But thank you, Colleen, for giving me this opportunity.
Oh, it was wonderful, Hitomi, and thank you, Evelyn, and thank you, Ryan. And I'm mortified at what happened today, and I'm so sorry, Hitomi. We have never had a problem before, so we clearly have to up our game on the on making sure things are a little bit tighter. That's just the way it goes. We've been lax because we've never had a problem.
Right. I hope, I don't know why, what was the reason, but it was something that's hacked, and then
all it takes is one person to be horrible, and it looks like he had some friends. So unfortunate. Anyway, thank you so much to everyone who stuck around, who supported Hitomi. You did a beautiful job of adapting when we couldn't have your pictures. And it's just been wonderful. You've just been brilliant. Thank you, Hitomi.
Thank you, and then nice to see you, Colleen. Thank you.
So once again, Hitomi does have a YouTube channel, and that is in the chat. The chat is safe. You can take a look at that and look at more of the content that she has already made. And hopefully we'll get another chance to chat with you again in a without interruptions.
If there's a chance to redo this, I'll be happy to join. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And I don't see your face here, but thank you for working hard and behind and then block all those strange intruders.
Yes, thank you so much, Ryan, for playing all the tech buttons and getting us to a good ending. That's always important.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, meeting you. And then thank you for people who write the chat. I hope I have a chance to read this chat after closing this. Can I still look at this chat? Or can you at least send me the chat, the printout or whatever for me, if I don't have an access to this main station?
Yeah. It should save automatically. And I just saved it myself, so I can send it to you.
Yeah, I've also saved it, so we will make sure that you will get a copy of the chat.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for sticking around, and hope you have a lovely rest of your Sunday afternoon or wherever you're joining us from. And thank you again so much, Hitomi-san, and we might be able to do this again, just so we don't have we don't have any more glitches and tech problems. And thank you so much again, everyone, for coming, and Hitomi-san for sharing with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And then hope I have a chance to redo and then do it again. Thank you so much.